This would be, if you don't read any of the other books, this would be my number one book to read out of the whole thing. These are my book recommendations that are garden themed. I haven't done one of these in a while, and I wanted to kind of come up with a clever way to meld together my gardening and my book reading. This channel right now has a duality to it, and I want to show that you can weave these two things together. This first group of books I'm going to put together as nature writing. Something about this writing, whether it's directly in the text or it's a way that it makes you feel, these are books that I feel bring that sense. We're going to start with The Secret Garden. This is a very classic children's book about a girl who becomes orphaned and she gets sent to a distant relative in the English countryside. So she's grown up in India and then she has to move to England. And there's something a little bit odd about this big house that she's moved into. She keeps hearing cries in the night. So there's a little bit of a ghost element. And then, of course, you hear The Secret Garden. There is a hidden garden, and it is magical and it is wonderful. In tandem with this one, I would also love to recommend The Humming Room, which is a retelling of The Secret Garden, but updated a little bit more. Same premise. A girl gets orphaned and is sent to a distant relative's house, and he's got kind of a weird, creepy house. There's cries in the night and a secret hidden garden. This one I remember loving so much when I read it. Another children's book that I'd like to recommend for that feeling is The Wind in the Willows. This is all about being in nature. It follows animals. I read this last year, but it is very classic, and it is a gentle, slow, lovely little tale. There's nothing apart from the characters that sort of weave each chapter together. It's their own little adventures. And this one reminds me of the murmur of a stream. That is what that book brings me. On to a young adult, This Poison Heart. This one was such a fun read. This is another sort of inheritance story where this girl inherits this house. She goes to it, meets a bunch of aunts that she didn't realize she had, and they have sort of like an apothecary where they sell tinctures and herbal medicines, and then she discovers something called a poison garden, which people are endlessly fascinated by. A poison garden is basically plants that are poisonous, and they're kept in a, like, usually locked, and it's kept away from other people so they don't accidentally poison themselves. But a lot of the plants in it are used for medicine. So it's those types of plants where in fine amount they are healing, and in great amounts they are deadly. This one I really enjoyed for just the fun of it, the idea of inheriting a place and then discovering all the hidden things. There are hidden rooms, there are hidden panels, there is a treasure hunt. It is a fun book. On the flip side, something that's a little bit more serious, I have Wild Beauty. This one begins with the most gorgeous piece of poetry that I have read in a long time, and it just continues in that vein. This is about a family that looks after this big estate. They are of the land, they look after the land, and they have a curse on them that every time they fall in love, that love then disappears. And it follows this beautiful family, beautiful writing, altogether stunning book. One that could be read by any generation is anything by L.M. Montgomery. She wrote the very famous Anne of Green Gables, which in and of itself would be a recommendation, but that's not the one I'm going to recommend today. I'm going to recommend The Blue Castle. This was a treasure find for me. This is a slower, different book than she normally would have written. It follows a young girl who her family believes is on the brink of old maiddom. But because she hasn't married yet and she's getting old, and she just decides, you know what, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I'm going to go out and find my own adventure. And she is a very romantic character. She sees the world very romantically, and it's just a lovely, slow, romantic story. And I would recommend this one. I would also recommend Emily of New Moon. I'm just going to throw that one in there. Child of the Hidden Sea was a treasure find of a book for me. This is a portal fantasy book where she starts off in, I think, Vancouver, BC, and she suddenly gets whisked away to this like other place, and I'm pretty certain she's a biologist of some kind. She definitely has some sort of a degree or a focus on nature, because I just remember every single book, just the focus on the nature of this new land, all of the things that she's trying to figure out, because it's a totally different place. She's comparing all of the knowledge that she has of animals and plants from our world to this new world that she gets whisked away on, and then gets embroiled in political schemes and all of that. And it's just it is a slower moving fantasy, but I enjoyed every single book in this series. Orm's Shadow was a delight of a book, delight of a novella that I found, and this one has a bit more of a darker edge to it in nature and that sort of more type land, like think rainy English countryside. I can't remember where it's set, but I just remember it's set on a farm, and there's a lot of legends about this land. It's about family secrets, and I think they're sheep farmers. So this one brings in the nature in terms of farming, but also the family secrets just makes it altogether more gripping, and it's short, so it's a lovely little tale to read. The last one in this section I'd like to recommend is Far from the Madding Crowd. This, again, in the same vein, has more of a nature feel in that it's farming. Thomas Hardy has a way of writing the English farming side as totally compelling. I joked that never have I ever been more interested in reading about sheep. This is about a woman, Bathsheba, who is like, she gets her own farm. I can't remember how, if she buys it or inherits it or whatever, but she basically begins to run it, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, this woman's running this place. And there's like a little bit of a love triangle, and there's like secrets and stuff, and it's a really wonderful book. But the thing about it is the writing about farmers and of the nature and of working the land. And I would love to recommend that one just for that. This next group of books I'd like to call the green books, because I noticed ones that I started writing down, they all had green in the title. So here all the green books are. The first one is Greenwood. This was a favorite of mine last year. This one is all about trees and how we relate to trees and how different people show their respect in different ways. This is one of those books that once you finish the story, you just look at trees differently. This was wonderful. This was a surprise for me, and I would highly recommend this one. Green Rider. This is one of my favorite ongoing fantasy series. I think it's up to 8 books now. I have loved mostly every single one of these books. I'm recommending the first one just because it's the first in the entire series. But I would say I think the third one, to me, and the 8th one have the most nature-y type of writing. The thing about Kristen Britton is she can capture the feeling of nature so well. She can capture the smells and the feel and the sounds that you hear, that you feel totally immersed. In that third book, I remember this is autumn. This entire book is just autumn. And she manages to create these incredible worlds with incredible adventures and stuff like that. Like, it's all that. But her writing is really what brings in the nature. This is a story about a young woman who's at a school and she thinks she's going to get kicked out, so she runs away, and then she ends up getting hired as sort of, I would say, like a postal worker for the king. And Green Riders are the postal service. They bring messages from the king all across the land. They bring the mail back to the king, all of the messages, and there's sort of this whole system. So there's a lot of outdoorness, riding on horses, staying at camps, staying in cabins. It's a very outdoorsy type of a book. Greengage Summer was, I don't even know how I found this one, but this was a delight of a classic book. It's about a mother that decides she's going to bring her 5 children on a holiday to, was it southern France? Champagne, I think that's what they said. And they go to this hotel and then the mother gets sick. So she ends up kind of dropping out of the story, and then the children, it's their coming of age as they sort of interact with different guests and grow up over the course of a summer. And it's beautiful, and it has that feeling of a childhood summer where you're growing up, and it's lovely. The very last book I'd like to recommend is called Bitter Greens. Kate Forsyth is one of my favorite writers. She's also really hard to find. I think she's an Australian writer. So every single book I've read of hers, I've given 5 stars. This one was the first one I read by her. It was one that was on my TBR for years and years and years. And I finally picked it up for a readathon, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So Bitter Greens is an historical novel that follows the woman who first penned the story of Rapunzel, while also a story of Rapunzel. And there's a couple of other stories woven in there, and it is incredible. There is nothing I could say more highly of this one. That if you enjoy historicals and if you enjoy fairy tale retellings, those are your things that you're going to want to read, because it is so well written. She does delve into really hard topics, but they are done so carefully and so wonderfully, so precisely. This would be, if you don't read any of the other books, this would be my number 1 book to read out of the whole thing. I hope this kind of gives you a bit of a taste of summery, gardeny, flowery books. My name is Karen. I'm the book Liebernaut. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.